So you have built your system, you've got your bedding ready, and now it's time to meet the worms. So we are using red wiggler worms. That is probably the most common composting worm that you would use. And so they are used to essentially living in this degrading matter down the ground. They're not worms that are digging down through the dirt. They're living in that upper layer where they have stuff like we're going to be feeding them to break down and eat. You really can't see many right now. That's because they're under the soil. They don't like the light. And so that's why we have the lid on our bucket. And you'll see if I dig my hand down in here a little bit, bring them up. There we go. So there they were. Under there, they're in this big ball like this because I have some food in with them. And so they're all eating away at that. So yeah, red wigglers. There's about 1,000 of these if they're adults in a pound of worms. That goes up. You'll be getting a little bit of a mixture. So there will be some juveniles. They'll be a bit smaller. And then maybe, or definitely as you keep going, you'll start to see eggs. So they'll lay eggs. They look kind of like grape seeds. They're yellow. They're pretty small, but you can see them as they go in. I don't have any with me right now. But these are the worms. And so next we'll talk about what to feed your worms and how to take care of them. I'm going to close these back up to get them out of the light. For feeding your worms, there really are just a few simple guidelines that are going to make everything go smoothly. The first of these is that you want to be feeding your worms fruits and vegetables. They can handle pretty much all fruits and vegetables with the exception of citrus. So don't add any orange peels to your container or anything like that. They also don't really like seasoning like we do. So if you've added salt to something, leftovers, or a sauce on something, they aren't going to want that. So don't add those foods. Stick to the fresh fruits and vegetables. And things should go smoothly. And then there are foods that you can add, but need to be in moderation. So there's a few different ways there. So eggshells you can add. They don't hurt the worms, but it does take them a long time to get through. They will eventually break them down, but I limit the amount I put in just because it takes them a long, long time to get through them. And then things like bread. So they can eat bread, but it does take them a long time, and it tends to actually start to mold before the worms are getting them. So I avoid that too. It's not something that's necessarily going to hurt the worms, but it's something to really be careful about just so nothing goes wrong with it. And then there's foods that you never want to put into your containers, and these are meat and dairy. The worms can't handle any of those, and all they're going to do in there is rot and attract the things that you don't want, like flies or mold. So if you're feeding fruits and vegetables, avoiding meat and dairy, things should be going good. The other thing to pay attention to is just how much you're feeding. In theory, your worms can eat about half their weight a day. So if you start out with a half pound, that'd be a quarter pound a day. But in my experience, they start out pretty slow. So that new colony is not going to be eating as much as a colony that's been established for a while. And they are going to be eating their bedding. So I would not start out adding that full half their weight a day. I think you're gonna invite some of those issues. Start small. It's better to underfeed than it is to overfeed. Once you get more used to your system and how much they're eating, you'll get an idea of how much you should be adding each day or every few days. Because I don't feed every day. I just wait between. I check them every few days. If they have food, I don't add more. If they don't, I add more food. And then the last bit with your worms is just going to be when it's time to harvest the castings. So with the systems we built, this 3-bucket system, all you have to do is take that second bucket that's been sitting empty below your worms this whole time, move it up to the top, put fresh bedding and food in there, and your worms will move up. They will finish whatever's down in that bottom first. So if there's still leftover food, if it hasn't been fully turned to compost, they'll stick around in that bottom for a while. So make sure you're giving them time to move up. But then you don't have to pick out the worms from the castings. It's a nice and easy system. There are other ways to do it, such as you can take what's in your bucket, pour it onto a more shallow surface, and then put light on it. The worms will dig down to avoid the light. You can take what's off the top, and that's another way to harvest. But I think moving the bucket is the easiest. It takes a little while. You got to give them that time to move up into their upper bucket. But once that's done, you're pretty much going to be left with those castings, and it's an easy way to get them out. Let me know how worm buckets go. Feel free to reach out with any questions you got about the worm composting. And I hope it goes well.